The story begins with a stinky, worthless orphan nerd named Haruto Amakawa, who is seen standing outside his family home. But he is actually moving away from his home in the suburbs and moving into the city. However, his childhood crush, Miharu, is extremely upset about him moving away, and cries asking him to stay here, but Haruto tells her to shut it and stop crying. He then promises that when he's older, he will remember her and come back here to save her, and they will get married so he can protect her for the rest of his life. After, the scene changes and we see a grown-up Haruto, who is on a bus on his way back from university, and he gets stared at by a young girl who is on the bus. Just then, the bus shakes out of control and Mr. Train-kun comes out of nowhere and isekais them all because why the hell not, right? When they get isekai'd, Haruto has another flashback of Miharu, and moments after, we see a smelly orphan slum dog boy who awakens in another world, who is named Ryo. When Ryo awakens, he is completely sweaty and who also reeks of pure dog shit. And as soon as the boy wakes up, he has flashbacks of another person's memories inside his head, and can't understand whose memories these are. He even forgets his own name Ryo, and starts calling himself Haruto Amakawa. But he then asks himself, who the hell even is this Haruto guy, and why are all his dreams suddenly all about Haruto? He then remembers a bus but doesn't even know what a bus is. He also recalls having a grandfather who used to train him martial arts, but it's all just one big blur to him. Suddenly, three men burst into the room where Ryo is being held, and they tell Ryo to wake up immediately. The three men are surprised that Ryo is still alive, as they ask him how he managed to survive such a terrible fever, and adds that they were just outside ready to dig him a hole. Just then, one of the men has a brown sack and lays it down in the corner. At that moment, they all sit down together, eating their food, and tell Ryo to get lost as he smells so bad, and is making the food taste weird, and beg Ryo to locate the Axe body spray outside that they dropped in the bushes. When the smelly boy heads outside, he begins picking some fruit plants as no one will give him any food. After that, Ryo has more flashbacks of Haruto. He understands how Haruto is a university student from Japan, and was on his way back from school, but suddenly he blacked out and was hit by a train while on a bus. However, Ryo is having a hard time understanding the modern-day Japan, and this modern-looking civilization, and doesn't even know what a bus is. He gets mixed opinions about who he is, but then realizes that he is in fact Ryo, just a lonely boy from the slums of the kingdom and nothing more. His only desire is to somehow get revenge for his mother's death. In another flashback of his childhood, Ryo was talking with his mother about visiting his grandparents' kingdom. She always promised Ryo that when he grew up just a bit, she would take him to visit their homelands, and where his mother grew up before they lived in this Beltram kingdom. But right then, his mother was killed off by some savage assassin, and ever since that day, Ryo only seeks revenge on the man who done this and became his only ambition to live on. After thinking about these tragic memories, a group of noble-looking girls approach Ryo, asking him if he has seen a cute and bubbly purple-haired girl anywhere, as she has gone missing. But Ryo replies, saying he hasn't seen anyone like that at all. They tell him how bad he smells and stay as far away while talking with him. One of the older girls, called Vanessa, is extremely rude to him, so Ryo gives an attitude back. After, a silver-haired girl named Celia apologizes for Vanessa's behavior and asks Ryo in a more polite way if he's seen or heard of anyone who might know where the purple-haired girl is. However, Ryo tells Celia that he doesn't know where she is and that he hasn't heard a thing of it. After, Celia asks the boy where the slums are, and Ryo replies, saying that her and her friends shouldn't go to the slums because they are wearing such fine clothes and something may happen. After, the ladies suggest changing clothes before heading into the slums, and just before heading back to the castle where they live, they decide to do one last check around, and this is when Celia uses a magic detecting spell to detect any magical forces in the area, to see if the purple-haired girl is close by. However, after checking, they still didn't detect their friend anywhere, but they did detect some magical activity coming from within inside Ryo's body. Vanessa asked Celia if she had done something to the boy, but she said no, and that this smelly slum boy seems to have some kind of magical spirit chronicle, and it seems to be very strong. Ryo is apparently the only one who can see this blue flame surrounding his entire body. But other than that, they come to realize that their purple-haired friend must be in the slums. So they thank smelly Ryo once again for the help and just leave him here to rot like a little worthless orphan. Just before leaving, Celia gives Ryo a bag of silver coins, so many coins that he couldn't even count them, and wears the bag around his neck like a pendant. After that, he rushes home to tell the others. But as soon as Ryo enters the yard, a masked assassin tries to stab him, but the blade hits the bag of coins, saving his life. At this moment, a weak and pathetic Rio cowers away in a corner and gets ready for the assassin to end him off. But suddenly, a mysterious pink-haired beauty cutie arrives in spirit form and calls Rio by his Japanese name Haruto, and said she will quickly explain the most basic forms of magical combat to save him right now, as Rio is too dumb to figure out he's actually a god-tier magician. After, Haruto starts to control Rio's body, and he starts to remember his training techniques from his past life when his grandfather used to train him, and Rio uses these skills to fight the assassin. However, the assassin has overpowered magic and tries his best to take Rio down, but Rio pulls an insanely powerful kick to his jaw, knocking his knife to the ground. While the hooded thug quivers in fear, he calls Rio a disgusting slum rat, and goes in for a final blow, but Rio manages to use a crazy technique to finish the assassin off, and Rio completely eliminates him. And he is shocked to find out just how strong he is when the dumb assassin doesn't wake up. After the fight, Rio finds out that the assassin had taken out all the other men in the room and he is now left all alone. Rio then hears noise coming from the brown sack that the men brought in earlier, and the bag is also moving. Rio checks inside the bag and finds the purple-haired girl called Princess Flora, which is the same girl that Celia and the others were searching for earlier. She tells Rio that she was captured for ransom by the thugs and that he must help her get back to the castle safely, and if he manages to get her back to the kingdom, her father will reward him nicely, and he will be knighted. Rio doesn't understand what she means by all this, but said he will help her get back to wherever she came from. After, the two of them make their way outside, but suddenly Rio is called out by the other members of royalty, as they spotted Rio carrying the Princess Flora. The noble girls rush over and blame him for taking the princess. They call him many names, and also how he betrayed them from the very beginning even after giving him silver coins, and arrest him for the crime. He tries explaining everything, but they don't listen or give him a chance to explain, as he's a common boy from the poor parts of the kingdom, so they take him to the castle to answer for his crimes to the king. Rio is then taken into custody by the king's guards, and here we meet a very evil guy called Charles. He's the Lord Commander and the first sword to the king, and he has the time of his life as he gets to humiliate a poor boy from the slums, as he absolutely hates the people who are from the poor parts of the city, and is basically just a stuck-up noble who thinks Rio is guilty as hell. However, Rio tells this dumb nobleman that he's done nothing wrong. But Charles doesn't listen and still proceeds to beat him up and batters him with a wooden stick until he's unable to take any more. Meanwhile, Princess Flora has awoken, and the maids and Celia speak with her and tell her that her captor has been found and is being punished for the crimes. However, she tells them that Rio is not to blame and that she wants Rio to be sent to her room immediately, as he was the one who set her free. After speaking with the princess, Celia heads down to the dungeons where Rio is being held, and Celia is shocked to find Rio barely alive, and she warns Charles about his actions as a king's guard and that she gave him orders to hold him and not to commit any conflict against him. Charles acts like he was doing the right thing and says he was only following orders, and then tells the men to let him down immediately. After, Rio falls down, and Celia apologizes and then heals him with some magic spell. After, Rio wakes up in a bed in the Beltram Kingdom, where he is greeted by Celia once again. Rio asks her what will happen to him now, and Celia replies, saying that he will be appointed by the king himself, and an audience will be present in the throne room upon meeting your majesty. And apparently the king is waiting for Rio as well, as he personally wants to thank him himself, which stuns the boy. However, Rio doesn't know the proper way to address a king, so Celia said he will help him get ready and know the proper manners to meet him in the most respectable way. After a little while, Rio learns the basics of being royal, and then enters the throne room to meet with the king, sporting a slick haircut. Rio earns admission at the Beltram Royal Academy of Magic, though Celia warns him that virtually all of the students come from privileged backgrounds, so he will more than likely be bullied out of his goddamn mind. Rio replies that he doesn't mind as he knows his place. Celia then opens the doors to his new class and his new life. When Rio is introduced as a student from the slums, the class starts murmuring amongst themselves. They don't want some disgusting flea-ridden kid from the projects in their midst. However, because Rio rescued Flora, the king personally saw to it that he received admission into the academy. Rio is met with a rather cold reception, and his illiteracy only exacerbates his issues. Later after class, Rio drops by Celia's faculty room to receive the private tutoring he was promised. The room is filled with complicated textbooks and scrolls. Despite Celia being only 12 years old, her brilliance has led her to become a respected professor. It just goes to show that no matter how good you are, there's always someone better than you. Celia is impressed by how quickly Rio has grasped arithmetic, which is no surprise considering that he has Haruto's college education. Over a cup of tea, Celia asks Rio how his first day of school went. It actually went spectacularly if you discount the discrimination he went through. The following day, Rio participates in a martial arts class. Taking note of Rio's firm and solid grasp of combat, the instructor invites him to a duel. Rio's strange stance causes many of his peers to ridicule him, but the instructor forms a different opinion. Rio uses Haruto's experience in kendo to put up a good fight, and his bold recklessness earns him his instructor's respect. When he invites Rio to join the Royal Knights, Rio turns him down since he has more important things to do. Later, Celia finds Rio buried in books as he reviews for the upcoming end-of-term exams. Though she tells him not to worry about his grades too much, Rio decides to do the opposite and worry about them. A few days later, Celia administers the end-of-term exams. While Rio's peers struggle to answer all the questions, he breezes through them. Rio exits the exam venue a little worse for wear, but his condition worsens when Haruto's memories come flooding back. He remembers Haruto's childhood sweetheart Miharu, and how they inevitably drifted apart once they reunited. A few days later, the exam results are posted. Rio tops the whole school year alongside Christina, while her childhood friend Rona is in third. The nobleman who has been instigating the discrimination against Rio, called Alphonse, accuses the latter of cheating somehow. However, Christina and Rona accept the test results as they are, while Celia vouches for the hard work that Rio put in as highly as he did. Alphonse and his Backstreet Boys refuse to listen, and they fling their bangs before leaving. Celia congratulates Rio on performing admirably on his exams, though she's worried that the other kids just might use this against him. Rio doesn't mind, because as long as he has Celia, he can make it through any storm, and Celia promised to support him however she can. 5 years later, a select few students are chosen to participate in an exhibition tournament. Among them are Alphonse, Stuart, and to everyone's surprise, Rio. Alphonse protests a commoner being chosen for such a prestigious position, but the instructor sternly tells him that the decision has already been made. Celia congratulates Rio on being chosen as one of the representatives, and she remarks that he might be recruited into the Knights Order directly if a scout takes a liking to him. However, Rio insists that he has no plans to enter the Knights Order. Celia enjoys her tea, and she asks Rio what he plans to do after graduating. He replies that he plans to go on a little journey. Rio is saddened to hear he plans to leave the country, and she invites him to stay behind and work for her at her laboratory. Rio has greatly improved Celia's quality of life, simply from brewing just the right cup of tea. Rio tells her that she'll be entering marriage talks soon, as is customary for someone of her stature, and it would be bad if a male commoner worked in her laboratory. She asks him where he plans to go, and he replies that he wants to go to Yagumo, the homeland of his mother. Rio momentarily enters a trance as he remembers his mother, which worries Celia somewhat. A few weeks later, the Royal Exhibition Tournament match is held, presided over by none other than our old friend Alfred. The first challenger is Rio, and Alphonse tells him not to put on a pitiful display, to which Rio promises not to disappoint him. To Rio's surprise, his opponent is Charles, the man who gave Rio quite the thrashing. Charles never would have thought that the smelly little rat he violated that day would be his opponent, and Rio quips back that he owes Charles a debt for treating him well. Alfred notices Rio's strange stance, while Charles feels insulted that Rio isn't even using a shield. When the match begins, they appear evenly matched at first. However, Charles is fueled by fury in 6 cans of Red Bull. He was slapped with a demotion 5 years ago for terrorizing Rio, and he wants to pay him back in blood. Suddenly, Rio is put on the defensive, causing Celia a great deal of worry. However, this is all part of the instructor's plan, and the moment Charles makes a bold move, Rio takes advantage of this wide opening and disarms him. Alfred declares Rio the winner, and he will have to defend his title next week against The Undertaker. Charles begrudgingly accepts his defeat, while Rio's peers shower him with applause. Charles drinks his frustrations away with Rias, an ambassador from the Proxia Empire. Rias lifts Charles's spirits, though Rias admits that Rio's movements were very impressive. Charles reveals that Rio was suspected in Flora's kidnapping 5 years ago, which reminds Rias of that time. The next day, Celia waits for Rio by the school gate so they can celebrate his victory at the exhibition match. When she notices him going behind the school, she follows him and witnesses a girl confessing her feelings to him. Without a doubt, Celia vexed. Celia tries to keep her mind off what she saw, and she finds Rio's empty after graduation plans. Later, Celia conducts a lecture on magic control using lightning magic. Alphonse jeers that the lecture seems rather beneath their class, and he taunts that only Rio would benefit from the lesson since he is incapable of magic. Celia asks Alphonse and Stuart to demonstrate the lightning spell for her, and they do as she asks. Celia takes one look at their discount Chidori and decides to show them what real magic control over lightning looks like. She shuts the blinds and casts multiple lightning spells at once, causing them to dance around the room before gently exploding into a shower of light. While it is true that Rio can't use magic formula like they can, using his abundant mana he can recreate spells that he sees with his eyes. Shortly after the lecture ends, Stuart gives his praise to Celia, but he berates Rio for rizzing up half the school's female population. He tries intimidating him to stop, but Celia vouches for Rio's integrity, and she tells Stuart to drop the subject. Later, the class participates in their outdoor practicum exam with Alphonse acting as the unit commander. They are to traverse the forest and reach the goal by sundown, and thanks to his father's connections, Alphonse has already prepared a secret route that will guarantee they succeed. Rona doesn't like the fact that this feels like cheating, though Christina allows Alphonse to do as he wishes. As always, Stuart has a little something prepared for Rio. He has assigned him as their baggage carrier. Flora offers to carry some of the luggage, but Rio turns her down. While going through the forest, they encounter a troop of goblins. Despite being a cheeky brat, Alphonse actually shows keen insight as a commander. He instructs the vanguard units to physically augment themselves, and together they bring down the much weaker goblins. Alphonse then catches Rio spacing out and calls for his attention. Hidden behind the trees, Rios is impressed that Rio noticed he was there, and he decides to put the young boy's skills to the test. Alphonse and the group follow his father's map only to end up at a dead end. A cliffside prevents them from proceeding any further. Going back would take too long, so Christina asks him what he plans to do next. Before he can answer, they are attacked by a trio of orcs. They are harried by a shower of spears, and as Alphonse tries to mount a defense, Stuart is injured in the leg. He is sent into a panic, and he inadvertently bumps into Flora, causing her to fall from the cliff. Without a moment's hesitation, Rio jumps in and rescues her at the cost of causing him to fall down himself. Alphonse finally manages to mount a coherent defense, and together they fend off the orcs. Rio, on the other hand, is perfectly fine. Shortly after, Alphonse tries to investigate what happened. Stuart denies bumping into Flora, and he accuses Rio of being the one who pushed him away. Upon seeing the mess that has developed, Rio ultimately decides to just ditch school and go on his journey early. However, Flora refuses to leave Rio for dead, and she'll find him alone if she has to. Suddenly, they all hear a blood-curdling roar, and a giant minotaur descends from the skies. When Christina's Thunderball fails to work, Alphonse instructs them all to use Ice Lance instead, and he takes command of the battle. However, when his vanguard crumbles under the minotaur's strength, he quickly signals a retreat. Christina and Rona leave first, believing that Flora has already evacuated. But in reality, she stayed behind to treat one of the students on the vanguard. The Minotaur discovers her, but before she is harmed, Rio appears and cuts the monster's hand off. He immediately tells her to retreat, and he does battle against a monster 10 times his size. Using the power of Odd, Rio is more than a match for the Minotaur. When it shows an opening, Rio jumps at the chance and cuts its head off. A few students return for Flora, and Rio uses this opportunity to slip away. Rios, who was observing Rio the whole time, identifies him as a descendant of Yagumo based on his black hair and eyes. Later, while Celia is bringing some materials to the headmaster, she overhears him talking with Duke Gustave over his son's actions that caused the disappearance of Rio. However, because the kingdom is currently at an all-time low, they need the nobility now more than ever. They cannot show weakness, so the headmaster is forced to pin the blame on Rio. Celia anxiously awaits news of Rio, but he himself shows up instead. Their reunion is a short one, and Rio thanks Celia for supporting him all these years, and if it weren't for her, he wouldn't have been able to last this long in such a hostile environment. He promises to write her letters using an alias, Haruto. The two embrace each other, and Celia says that she'll be eagerly waiting for his letters. As she watches him go, she reminisces about the 3 episodes they spent together. Rio takes one last look at the kingdom, and he departs for Yagumo. Meanwhile, Gustave brings one of Rio's cloaks to a beastskin assassin named Latifa and instructs her to track him down and kill him. Rio flies out the gate, and in 3 days' time he reaches Amand, a market town in the kingdom of Galark. Fortunately, his wanted posters haven't reached the town, letting him secure the supplies he needs unimpeded. Rio senses someone following him, but thinks that he's just being too paranoid. It's all in your head, bro. Gaslighting isn't real. While wandering through the city, Rio's attention is called by a street vendor selling a pasta-based dish, which he claims was introduced into the city by the local ruler named Lisa Lottie. After eating and regaining his strength, the vendor directs him to the Rika Merchant Guild, adding that there's a food stall right in front of its doors. Rio passes through the guild's doors and meets a receptionist called Lottie, who takes note of his black hair. Lottie assists him as he selects preserved foods to help him out on his journey. She later brings his supplies to a waiting room, where she finds his familiarity with tea and teaware intriguing. Before Rio leaves, he writes a letter to Celia, informing her that he will no longer be able to write her letters once he leaves the region. Rio sets out with a heavy pack of supplies and Lottie sees him off. Another receptionist named Cosette addresses Lottie as Lizalotti, and Lizalotti reminds her that she's using an alias right now. While trekking through a forest, Rio stumbles upon an injured figure in the middle of the road. Lured into a false sense of security, Rio goes up to help the person only to be attacked with poison needles. That's the last time he does anything selfless. Latifa draws a dagger intending to take Rio's life, although they're mutually surprised that the other can move as fast as they can. However, when Latifa casts a physical enhancement spell, Rio is also forced to turn things up a notch. Noticing that Latifa is too fixated on her knives, Rio sheathes his sword and shifts to using his fists, managing to snap her out of the air and pin her to the ground. Latifa reacts hysterically, forcing Rio to cast a weak sleep spell to get her to calm down. Identifying the collar around her neck as a slave collar, Rio dispels it. Latifa is then revealed to be the girl who died alongside Rio in the traffic accident, named Endo Suzyun. What the heck? Was everyone in that accident just reincarnated? She is also the slave of Stuart, who forces her to call him older brother through the use of an obedience collar. So disobeying her orders subjects her to immense physical pain and she is thoroughly broken in. When Latifa regains consciousness, she is wary and fearful of Rio at first. But when she sees that he has removed the collar around her neck, she starts crying tears of joy and relief. Rio interrogates Latifa, learning that she is associated with Stuart, and that there are unlikely to be any other pursuers. After confirming that she no longer intends to harm him, Rio frees her from her binds. However, even though she is free now, Rio knows that in this region of Strahl, beastskin like her are captured and made into slaves. He tells her to head east to a large area known as the Wilderness where other demi-humans live. It just so happens that Rio is heading in the same direction. Rio tries to leave her behind, but Latifa starts following him. Rio clarifies that he didn't free her because he's a good person. Finishing her would only make things troublesome. Even though she was forced to attack him, Rio doesn't trust her enough to journey with her. With tear-filled eyes, Latifa offers Rio her slave collar so that she can be obedient to him. Though she hates being a slave, she hates being alone even more. Rio relents and allows her to accompany him, though he asks her to throw away that damn collar. Latifa joins Rio on his journey to the east, and while camping, Latifa starts crying when she finally has the first real meal she's had in ages. While journeying through harsh and rugged terrain, Rio decides to camp early for the night after seeing that Latifa is tired. Meanwhile, Celia receives Rio's letter. Though she's sad that she won't receive any more letters for a while, she's glad that he's still alive and well. While camping for the night, Rio is surprised that Latifa is familiar with the concept of spaghetti, and she is also accustomed to eating it. Rio has an inkling feeling that Latifa is just like him, someone who reincarnated into this world. His suspicions are confirmed when he overhears Latifa having a nightmare and talking in her sleep, crying out that she wants to go back to Tokyo. The next morning, Latifa wakes up first and notices that Rio looks a lot like the boy she saw on the bus. When Rio wakes up, Latifa asks him if she can start calling him older brother, and he lets her, hoping that this small comfort will help her. Their journey continues across arid wastelands, jagged valleys, volcanic regions, frozen landscapes, and verdant grasslands. Basically, the entirety of Pokémon Mystery Dungeon, Red and Blue Rescue Team. Rio spots a large tree in the distance, but strangely Latifa can't see it. Rio takes this to mean that the tree is being magically hidden from others. As they camp within the forest grounds, Rio eases Latifa's suffering by removing her nightmares. When he notices the campfire outside going out, he encounters a wolf that suddenly glows blindingly white. Rio's sense of sight is taken away from him and he is surrounded by 4 demi-human girls: Yuzuma, a harpy; Sarah, a wolfman; Alma, a dwarf; and Orphea, a high elf. Rio tries to reason with them, and though the girls are inherently distrustful of humans, Sarah convinces the others that they should at least hear him out. As Rio tries to explain his circumstances, Orphea and Alma discover Latifa inside his tent, in a deep slumber due to a sleeping spell. Yuzuma is convinced that Rio is guilty of kidnapping one of their kind and she attacks him. Rio tries to explain that this is all a big misunderstanding, and strikingly, they notice Rio using some sort of spirit art. Alma constrains his movements using an earth spell, allowing Yuzuma to tase him unconscious. Rio enters a dreamlike state with the mysterious woman who taught him how to use Odd, the magical power that flows through his veins. Although their time together is short, and she hopes that Rio at least has sweet dreams. When Rio wakes up, he finds himself in shackles. Latifa runs into the room, glad that he is finally awake. She angrily looks at the four girls and demands to know if they were the ones responsible for hurting Rio. One of the village heads named Ursula enters the room and apologizes for the mistreatment he suffered. Yuzuma and the other girls similarly kneel down and offer their apologies. Ursula reassures Rio that Yuzuma and the other girls will be punished accordingly. As Orphea frees Rio from his shackles, Ursula informs him that the other elders will also offer their formal apologies the following morning. For now, all they can offer him is this room. The following morning, Ursula brings Rio toward the Hall of the Elders. On the way up, Rio notices the large tree in the distance again. Ursula explains that this is the World Tree, where a mighty spirit, Dryas, resides. Ordinarily, only those with keen spiritual senses can see it, so Ursula is intrigued that Rio is able to. Rio meets the two other elders of the village, Sildora, an elf, and Dominic, a dwarf. They apologize for the mistreatment he suffered and thank him for freeing one of their own kind. They offer to grant Rio any desire within their power, though all he asks is that they take in Latifa. However, since Latifa seems to be attached to him now, Rio asks if he can stay in the village for a while. The elders all unanimously agree. Dominic even invites him to marry one of the village girls if he so desires. Lastly, Rio requests that he be taught the spiritual arts and any other techniques that might be useful for daily life. Suddenly, the village's guardian deity and spirit of the World Tree, Dryas, appears in all her glory. Dryas closely inspects Rio and discovers that there is a dormant spirit dwelling within him, which she says prevents humans from casting magic. Rio knows all about that. Dryas takes a closer look inside his body and is surprised to find that the spirit is a human-shaped one. Human-shaped spirits, she explains, were mostly wiped out during a divine war 1,000 years ago. These types of spirits are second class, like Dryas herself. This revelation means the elders have to reconsider how they treat Rio, who now holds the same position as a saint or a person of similar honor. Basically, he'll have a VIP pass to go around the village. Afterwards, Orphea brings Rio to his new home, where Latifa and the other girls are already waiting. To his surprise, the village has access to a rice-like food, which they explain originates from the Yagumo region. Later, Rio is shocked to learn that Orphea and the other girls will be living with him from now on. Ursula appears and explains that this is for the best, so that Latifa can form relationships and bonds with people other than him. Rio agrees. Days and weeks pass by in the blink of an eye. Rio spends time with his new companions while studying spiritual arts and doing the sorts of things you do in the countryside. A grand spirit festival is held to honor the World Tree, which Rio participates in. Meanwhile, Rias and an unwitting adventurer procure a mysterious egg from deep within a cave, which Rias explains will augment the military strength of his Celestial Lion Brigade. As they fly off, a massive, black creature follows them. An entire year has passed since Rio and Latifa began living in the village. To formalize their residency, they each receive a kiss from Lady Dryas. As soon as the ceremony completes, Dominic announces the beginning of the feast. Dwarves are one of two things: blacksmiths, drunks, or both. With the party in full swing, Orphea and the other girls complain that Rio is always guarded, even though he seems to be close to Latifa. They want to be close friends with him, too. Rio smiles and welcomes their friendship. They leave to get some more alcohol to drink together, and Rio speaks to Ursula about his plans to leave the village. So much for friendship. Meanwhile, Rias leaves his companion behind to scout out the area. He hands him a red pill, which he swallows. Rias flies into the sky and spots the black wyverns flying in the distance. Rio and Latifa go out for a late-night stroll. He asks her if she likes living here, and she says that she does. Orphea and the other girls are nice, as is Ursula, but most of all, Rio is here. Not anymore, kid. Rio tells Latifa that he plans to leave the village to continue his journey to Yagumo. Latifa insists on going with him, but Rio says that he doesn't know the dangers that lie ahead. Angered, Latifa runs off. Elsewhere, the village elders meet to discuss the sightings of several black wyverns in their area, while Rias infiltrates the wyverns' den and begins stealing all their eggs. Sarah and the other girls take flight to survey the area. When they spot a young adventurer and a griffin camped near a watering hole, they fly down and interrogate him. Sarah gives strict instructions not to instigate a fight without her orders. When they see that the man has an egg in a sling around his chest, they become gravely concerned. The adventurer quickly flees on the griffin, forcing Sarah to order him captured, by force if necessary. Uzama fires off some quick thunderbolts, but the griffin deftly evades them. But can it evade that wyvern? When Sarah and the others see the black wyvern, they realize that the egg is a wyvern egg. She chases the wyvern down before it can enter the village, and she asks one of the harpies to send word to the elders of this new development. Rias wraps up stealing the dragon eggs, and with it, the role of the adventurer. He crushes a small, red gem, killing him instantly. The adventurer, along with the egg, plummets to the ground. Sarah asks Alma to continue chasing after the wyvern, and she lends her Hel, her wolf spirit animal. Down on the ground, Latifa agonizes over the prospect of Rio leaving. When she sees something fall from the sky, she hurries over to inspect it, only to discover a dead body and a shattered egg. Suddenly, the black wyvern lands in front of her. When it sees its child dead from the fall, it lets loose a powerful roar of grief. Rio returns to the village and encounters Dominic, who is directing the evacuation efforts. He tells Rio that the festival is cancelled due to a flight of wyverns. Rio hears Latifa's voice in the distance, and he sprints back into the forest. Latifa is rescued by Alma, who redirects the wyvern's flame breath back at it. She summons her own spirit animal, Ifrita, and in conjunction with Hel, they pounce on the wyvern. However, Alma's own blows prove ineffective, and the battle turns into a test of endurance. She has to hold out until the village can finish evacuating. Latifa tries to distract the wyvern. When it traps her with a giant log, it prepares to attack her, but this time, it's Rio who comes to her rescue. He carries her off to safety, and he starts beating up the wyvern with his bare hands. When the wyvern tries to breathe another ball of flame, Rio fires off a bolt of energy into the dragon's throat, causing it to misfire its blast. Rio then pummels it from above, rocking its brain and killing it. Alma is shocked that Rio was able to defeat a wyvern so easily, and with his bare hands, no less. Seeing this, the other wyverns retreat. Sarah and the others arrive, and Alma tells them of how Rio defeated the wyvern single-handedly. She wonders why the other wyverns retreated, and Sarah explains that wyverns are cautious creatures. If they know that the enemy is too strong, they won't attack them. The next morning, Latifa apologizes to Rio for how she acted the night before. She has grown dependent on him and has always treated him like an older brother, discounting the times she tried to kill him, of course. Rio finally tells her why he wants to go to Yagumo, and Latifa responds with a secret of her own. She died once, and she comes from a land called Japan. Rio confides that he's the same as her. What an amazing coincidence that two Japanese people would be reincarnated at the same time and place. Latifa promises to wait for him until the day he returns. The elders and Rio's friends see him off. They gift him a mithril sword and a matching coat of armor made from the wyvern's skin, making him look like a discount Kirito. In addition to sacks of supplies, they also give him a space-time cache, because an Isekai story wouldn't be complete without dimensional storage. Rio promises to return if the village ever faces mortal danger. He says his final goodbyes, especially to Latifa, his little sister. With that, he flies off. 2 weeks have passed since Rio arrived in the Yagumo region, which suspiciously looks a lot like Japan. But he has yet to find clues about his parents. He asks two young girls, Ruri and Seo, to take him to their leader. They bring Rio to the village elder, Yuba, who agrees to sit down and talk with him. Rio explains that his parents lived here over 15 years ago. However, when Rio reveals that his parents' names are Zen and Ayen, Yuba tells Ruri and Seo to leave the two alone. Rio recounts his history with his mother and his journey to Yagumo, which confirms everything that Yuba needs to know. She reveals that she is Zen's mother, which makes her his grandmother. Rio wants to give his parents a proper burial, but Yuba explains that they already have graves for them. She brings him to their headstones, which they set up shortly after they left the village for reasons she cannot tell him. She offers to let him live with her and Ruri, his cousin. Rio accepts. After lingering by his parents' graves a while longer, he returns to Yuba's home. The next morning, Rio is up and early. Ruri, forgetting that a boy is now in the house, exits her room with a sloppy appearance. Rio helps them prepare breakfast and shows off a bit of his spiritual arts by mixing hot water into the miso soup. Seo and her older brother, Shin, arrive for breakfast. Shin eyes him warily at first, but men are simple creatures, and he warms up to him when he realizes how good his cooking is. After breakfast, Yuba asks Shin to take Rio to Dola, as she wants him to be a hunter. Shin underestimates Rio's physical prowess, but he begrudgingly agrees. Rio leaves with Shin, while Ruri teases Seo about her blooming feelings for Rio. Ryo joins Shin in hunting with Dola, the hunt master. While Ryo's arrows easily find their marks, Shin struggles to hunt a single animal. When the hunt ends, Shin sulks and he storms off. Ryo, seeing how dirty he's become, decides to take a bath. Since there's no bath in the village, he makes one himself. When Rory and Seo discover the strange structure, Ryo comes out and explains to them what it is. Rory gives Seo a playful push so that she can smell how good Ryo is. When Shin and his friends discover what Ryo has done, they behave rudely toward him, believing that he's only doing this to score points with the locals. Rory and Seo come to his defense, forcing Shin to back off. As the days pass, Shin helps out with various village chores, unintentionally attracting the affections of the village girls and the ire of Shin. Later, Yuba asks Ryo if he can guard their shipment of rice to the capital, and he agrees. Suddenly, they hear a commotion brewing. Shin has gotten into a fight. Shin confronts Gon, the son of a chief from the neighboring village, for waltzing into the bath. He explains that he's on his way to trade goods at the capital, but his cart broke down and it will take time to repair it. Gon asks to stay with Rory in the meantime, since the pair are likely to be married in the future due to them both being heirs to their respective villages. Shin tries to defend his sister's honor by throwing a punch, but Gon easily overpowers him. Yuba finally shows up and puts an end to the confrontation. She agrees to house Gon at a spare house near the edge of the village, and she forbids him from leaving. As Gon walks away, he spots Ryo and tries to give him a kick in the leg. Gon trips over instead. Too bad nobody saw what happened. Shin asks Yuba to shelter Seo in the meantime, and she agrees. That evening, Ryo gives Seo a beautiful protective amulet to ward off danger. Meanwhile, Gon and his men are up to something bad. The next morning, Ryo joins Yuba in entertaining and welcoming Hayate, the region's chief tax collector. After showing him their harvest and treating him to a filling dinner, Ryo trains outside the bath. Rory and Seo approach him and ask why he took up martial arts, and he explains that he wanted to protect a girl he loved long ago. Hayate exits the bath and encourages Rory and Seo to bathe before it gets chilly. That evening, Gon infiltrates their house and tries to assault Rory. However, thanks to Ryo's protective charm, he quickly responds to the attack. Gon attacks Ryo, but instead he flings him outside the house, stepping on his throat and punching him to within an inch of his life. Hayate finally responds to heal Gon and takes him into custody. Ryo cools off, worried that his psyche is slowly mixing with that of Haruto's. The following morning, Hayate tells them that Gon will be arrested. Ryo apologizes for how heated he got the night before, but Rory and Seo are just happy that he was so quick to come to their aid. With that aside, it's time for them to have breakfast. Hayate prepares to leave, bringing Gon along as a prisoner, so Yuba hands him a letter to give to his father Gauki. With their final preparations finished, Hayate along with Ryo and a few other villagers head to the capital of the kingdom of Karasuki. While Dola gets the other men from the village settled into the inn, he asks Ryo and Shin to accompany him to the constabulary so they can watch as Gon is taken away in irons. Shin thinks that Gon got off a little too easy, as he would have killed him. Afterwards, Dola takes them both out for some kamatan, a noodle-based dish. Ryo is immediately taken with the dish, which makes Dola and Shin happy. Later, Shin thanks Ryo for saving his sister like he did when Gon attacked her. He suddenly remembers that he has to have Seo try some of the kamatan, too. The next day, at Shin's insistence, Seo accompanies Ryo on a shopping trip, and he invites her to eat some kamatan after. A crafty street merchant invites them to pick out a souvenir, and Seo selects a pink flower hair ornament. Before they leave, the merchant whispers to Seo to do everything she can to make Ryo hers, since she can tell that he'll be very popular. While walking down the road, Ryo rescues a young noblewoman by the name of Komomo. Her attendant takes her off his hands and thanks him for his assistance. When some soldiers come running to respond to the disturbance, Ryo grabs Seo's hand so they can run away. Gauki tells his son Hayate that Komomo was almost kidnapped, but she was saved thanks to the efforts of a mysterious stranger. Hayate hands his father the letter that Yuba wanted him to give, and the contents of it shock Gauki. It must have been one of those BuzzFeed Top 10 articles. Ryo and Seo return home, where several of the men smirk upon seeing the hair ornament tucked in Seo's hair. However, before Ryo can go inside, Hayate and Gauki ask to see him. Gauki introduces himself and his wife Kyoko. Once upon a time, they were both attendants to his mother, Karasuki Ayame. Ryo is the son of royalty. 20 years ago, the kingdom of Karasuki was at war with the neighboring kingdom of Rokuren. Zen was a skilled soldier, and after a duel with Gauki, Gauki recommended that he become a personal bodyguard of the royal family. Zen and the young Ayame quickly became smitten with each other. However, during peace negotiations with the Rokuren, one of the ambassadors took a liking to Ayame and tried to have her abducted. Zen, reacting quickly, saved her. However, the ambassador, resentful that his plan was foiled, called for a political marriage with Iam and demanded that Zen be executed. To avoid further conflict, Zen and Iam eloped. After seeing Ryo in the flesh, Gouki is confident that he is indeed the son of Zen and Iam. He asks him to accompany him to the castle to meet the current king and queen. The next day, Ryo meets King Hamura and Queen Shizuku, his grandparents. They ask Ryo about Zen and Iam, and he recounts everything he knows. He explains that his parents are already dead. His father died from unknown causes when he was young, and his mother was killed right in front of him. He and his mother lived happily together, and Iam never showed grief or weakness. Lucius, an adventurer and close family friend, suddenly came to the house one day and force-fed Ryo a potion. When his mother saw what had happened, Lucius killed her to keep her silent. Afterwards, Ryo was abandoned in the slums and grew up alone. After rescuing Princess Flora, he was allowed to attend a prestigious educational institution. It wasn't easy, but Ryo looks back on his time at the academy rather fondly. Hamura asks him what he plans to do about Lucius, and Ryo doesn't hesitate for a moment. He will seek him out and kill him without fail. Hamura reminds him that the path of revenge is filled with pain, but even so, Ryo has made up his mind. Before Hamura can give him his blessing, he asks him to duel Gouki, one of the strongest warriors in the region. Ryo accompanies Gouki back to his home, where Ai, one of their attendants, identifies him as the man who rescued Komomo. Ryo and Gouki have their duel, and the old man is almost frightened by Ryo's ferocity and formless style of fighting. He tries using one of his hidden techniques called Wind Slash, but Ryo counters back with a torrent of water that wipes him out. Ryo aims his sword at Gouki's throat, and Ryo is declared the winner. Hamura had intended for him to train under Gouki, but as he can see, it won't be needed. Ryo and the others return to the village. He visits his parents' graves one more time, resolving to move forward, and only forward. Ryo tells Ruri about his royal heritage. She starts talking to him overly formally at first, but he asks her to speak to him like she always has, in all her cheeky glory. However, he informs Ruri and Yuba that he intends to return to his home country next year, but he'll stop by a certain place first. Ruri tells him he is always welcome to come back. When they ask him if there's someone waiting for him back home, he tells them of a certain girl who treats him like an older brother. The next day, Ryo drops by the sewing house to say hello. When the other girls notice that they're on a first-name basis, they become jealous. The days pass by in the blink of an eye as Ryo lives out his carefree days in a village he has come to consider his third home. While Ryo oversees Ruri's rice planting, Dola jokes that she'd make a good wife. Ryo checks on Seo's progress, and he admits that he'll be leaving after the next harvest festival. Seo hides her tears, pretending that something got stuck in her eye. When she returns home, she collapses to the floor and weeps. Upon seeing this, Shin thinks that Ryo did something to make her cry, but she explains that Ryo just plans to leave the village. Shin marches over to Ryo's house, prostrates himself, and begs him not to leave the village. Seo grabs her brother and apologizes for the trouble he caused, and they lay the matter to rest. When Ruri returns, she notices the tension in the air and asks if something has happened. Yuba replies that it was nothing. The days pass by again, and as the rice grains grow, so does Seo. She secretly trains in the spiritual arts and combat techniques for some unknown reason. A few months pass, and the village holds their annual harvest festival. The shirtless Gouki challenges any man brave enough to beat him in the ring, and a few men push Dola into fighting him. Meanwhile, Ryo helps Ruri and Komomo make the kamitan. While Ryo speaks with Kyoko, Seo asks to speak with him in private. She leads him a short distance into the nearby forest, and she confesses her love for him. However, Ryo is unable to reciprocate her feelings, and he deeply apologizes. Seo asks him to at least take him on his journey, explaining that she's trained hard so that she won't drag him down. Though her efforts were admirable, Ryo does not change his mind, nor does he allow her to accompany him. Ryo walks away silently, apologizing to Shin, whom he knows was hiding nearby. Ryo sets out early the next morning while the sun has yet to rise. Ruri and Yuba see him off, and they invite him to come back whenever he wants. When Ryo heads towards the gate, he sees Seo standing nearby. In a flashback, Gouki asked her if she loved Ryo enough to forsake the village she grew up in. Though she hesitates at first, she declares that her love for Ryo is strong enough to do just that. Seo bids him a bittersweet farewell, and she waves goodbye. Shin also waves goodbye in the background, but he's so small that his face isn't even visible. Ryo flies back to the spirit village, and Latifa runs into his arms. He tells the elders all about his travels and his time in the region of Yagumo. Latifa is excited to learn that she also technically has a grandmother and a cousin. The elders ask Ryo how long he plans to stay at the village, and he replies that he'll only be able to stay for a few months before he moves on again, though he promises to come back even sooner. Rio was also thinking of bringing a house with him in his space-time cache, which Dominic thinks he can do. Afterwards, Rio returns home after a long 2 or 3 years. After talking to the girls, he feels as though he's finally home. Latifa invites Rio to take a bath with her, which the other girls think is a little scandalous. But that's not the most scandalous thing. The next morning, Rio wakes up and finds a girl in his bed. He thinks he's dreaming at first, as we all do. However, Sarah and the other girls enter his room and see him with a woman. Good luck trying to explain your way out of this one. The girls demand an explanation as to who this girl is, but Rio doesn't even know where to begin. Sarah deludes herself into thinking that she's at fault for stumbling into him like this. Finally, the girl wakes up, and she sleepily explains that she is a spirit that has formed a contract with Haruto. Rio remembers her as the girl who showed up that one time, showed him how to use spirit arts and never called back. That sounds like a failed first date. However, the girl doesn't have a name and she asks Rio to give her one. The other girls notice that she is calling Rio Haruto, and the girl speaks to Rio via telepathy, promising not to let the other girls know what he really is. Still, she wants that name, and Rio asks her to wait a while. Sarah suggests that he take this girl to the elders, who are better equipped to figure out what's going on. The girl stands up and uses spiritual arts to dress herself. Seeing her in all her glory, Rio instinctively calls her Aisha, since he reminds her of spring. In their ancient language, Aisha means spring. They bring Aisha to the elders, who convene a meeting. Dryas appears after having sensed a new spirit being born in her vicinity. However, Aisha is unable to remember anything, which is strange for elevated spirits. Dryas asks Aisha what spiritual arts she is proficient in, and she bluntly replies, everything. They head outside, where Rio will duel Aisha to get a grasp of her fighting strength. Rio throws a rock into the air, and once it hits the ground, their duel begins. First, they say hello with their fists. Rio enters close combat, and to his shock, Aisha has fully grasped all his moves and attack patterns. He breaks away and bathes himself in spiritual energy, which Aisha can also do. They exchange frightening magical blows from ice shards, fireballs, and tempestuous tornadoes. When their battle begins to deal more collateral damage than expected, Dryas ends the battle early. She's no avatar, but Aisha is definitely strong. Dryas decides to take Aisha under her wing and educate her on matters of the spirit. Likewise, the elders welcome her into their community. Aisha joins the village as though she were here from the beginning, receiving lessons from Dryas and helping with various chores. A few weeks later, Dominic shows Rio the special house he built for him, which Rio can put inside his space-time cache. Now that the house is complete, Rio intends to pay his respects to the elders before leaving once more. Sarah pulls Rio aside. While she and the other girls are mentally okay with him leaving, she asks him to spend a little more time with Latifa before he goes. That evening, Rio reflects. He's been spending too much time on his spiritual training and not enough time with Latifa. Latifa takes matters into her own hands. She enters the bath, hell-bent on washing Rio's back. All she does, she shares that her real name is Endo, and Rio shares that his real name is Haruto. After talking a bit more, they both realize that they were in the same accident that sent them to this world. Crazy how nature works like that. Rio apologizes for not being a better brother to her, and he promises to come back as soon as he can. The next morning, Rio prepares to leave the spirit village yet again. Ursula hands him a spirit teleportation crystal, a one-way teleportation device that allows him to return to the village, and Sildora hands him a special earring that changes the color of his hair so that he has an easier time hiding while he's in the Strahl region. He asks them all to take care of Latifa while he's gone, and Latifa bids him farewell. Rio and Aisha fly back to the Strahl region, eager to see Celia once more. Celia stands in the middle of a courtyard, clutching the last letter she received from Rio. Charles, now her fiancé, flirts with her before being called away by one of his attendants. Celia looks back at the letter and wonders where Rio is. Rio returns to Beltrant, the capital of the Kingdom of Beltram. He notices that there seem to be more people than usual. He disguises his hair and asks a baker what all the commotion is about, and she explains that a wedding for a noble is being held soon, from the House of Arbor. Later, Rio and Aisha infiltrate his old college so he can see Celia again. However, to his shock, her laboratory is completely empty. She either quit or took Marie Kondo way too seriously. Rio uses spiritual arts to extract the truth from one of the other professors, and to his horror, he learns that Celia is at the royal palace, as she is to be married to his old enemy, Charles. Rio learns that, in his absence, the kingdom of Beltram suffered a devastating defeat from the Proxia kingdom. The House of Huguenot, forced to take the fall for the disastrous defeat, was forced to flee the capital. Thus, the House of Arbor rose to prominence, and to solidify their position, they arranged a marriage with the House of Clare. It is a marriage of convenience, though the professor doesn't know if the House of Clare is fully in agreement with it. With the wedding scheduled for tomorrow, Rio wants to ask Celia herself what she thinks of the marriage. Aisha, who knows what Celia looks like, volunteers to search for her in the palace, even amidst the tightened defenses. Celia has dinner with her father, Roland, and her fiancé, Charles. Charles reassures Roland that the marriage between their two houses will show their rivals that the kingdom of Beltram is still strong. Charles talks about the rumors that Roland and a few other houses are secretly still in contact with the Huguenot family, though Roland denies these allegations. Regardless, the marriage will solidify Roland's loyalty, and Charles also intends to appoint him as the director of the House of Arbor. Roland grits his teeth. He hates that the marriage is necessary, but he lacks the skill of political maneuvering. All he and Celia can do is smile and do as Roland says. Later, Aisha discovers Celia's location, and she relays her position to Rio. While sitting by her study table, Celia considers burning Rio's letter. She had hoped to see him one last time before the ceremony. Ask and ye shall receive. Rio enters her bedroom, and for the first time in 4 years, in 9 episodes, they are finally reunited. Celia has missed him dearly, and Rio feels the same. She asks him to tell her all about her adventures over a cup of tea, but Rio asks her about her feelings regarding her wedding first. Celia insists that it's about time for her to get married, and she claims that despite Charles's flaws, he is chivalrous and respects women. Rio has a problem with this obviously, and she asks him if he'd be willing to take her away and elope with her. However, she stresses that she was just kidding, and she suddenly tells Rio to leave and asks him not to attend the wedding ceremony. She pushes him out the door and gives him 20 seconds to leave. Alone once more, Celia cries her heart out, but she is happy that she was able to see him one last time. Rio is unable to get a grasp of Celia's true feelings, but Aisha promises to help him get to the bottom of all this. The following day, Rius visits his old friend Charles. While talking, Rius senses a powerful spirit nearby, but just as quickly it disappears. Charles has one of his men show Rius to the wedding venue. Meanwhile, Celia steels herself for the wedding to come, repeating to herself that she is just a doll and nothing more. Charles asks her to come outside and meet his 6 other wives. When Charles lays his eyes on Celia, he is smitten all over again. He hopes that she can become good friends with the other girls. The first wife, Tennyson, reminds Celia that as the upcoming 7th wife she will be at the bottom of the totem pole, and she should know her place. Celia is quick to accept her new position. She doesn't want any trouble. Their little K-drama moment is interrupted by the surprise arrival of Princess Christina. Christina is happy to see Celia again, and she asks that Tennyson and the other wives make like a tree and leave. She wants a private chat with her former professor. Christina notices that Celia's complexion is rather pale, and she explains that she slept rather poorly the night before. Christina is guilty about the whole situation. Because of the royal family's weakness and the forced exile of Duke Huguenot's family, Celia has been forced into this position. Christina remarks that she always looked up to her and her smile, and if there's anything she can do to bring that smile back, she promises to do everything in her power to help. Celia thanks her for her concern, and likewise, she prays that she and Princess Flora can be reunited again one day. Charles and Alfred discuss the security for the lavish ceremony, but Charles reminds him not to show off. Charles is the one in command now, not him. A few hours later, the wedding ceremony between Charles and Celia officially begins, starting out strong with a lavish and expensive parade. Charles does what antagonists do best and acts like a total creep. When her carriage draws closer to the palace, Aisha speaks to her through telepathy, and she asks her to look to her side. Celia spots Rio in the crowd, and she is driven to tears. He was the one person she didn't want to see her like this. As they approach the heavily guarded palace, Celia hears a commotion from their security detail. Rio has broken through the barricades in a daring daytime raid. Rio, in disguise, fights through the security detail with frightening speed and ferocity, but Charles is confident that his elite soldiers will be more than enough to hold a single brigand at bay. They do not hold the single brigand at bay, and Rio makes it to the front of the parade. He punches Charles in the chest, and he takes Celia hostage in front of a crowd. While the security detail tries to get the situation under control, Rio speaks to Celia via telepathy. Charles tries to struggle free, but Rio rubs his boot into his back. Rio reassures Celia that this entire disturbance is just an act. He won't hurt anyone, aside from the 100 or so men he fought through to get here. He asks Celia again if she wants this wedding to happen, offering to put a stop to the whole thing himself if she wishes. He knows he is being arrogant, but he is tired of losing things that are important to him. He won't let the tragedy of his mother happen again. He asks Celia again if this is what she wants, but that is a difficult question to ask. This marriage is meant to solidify the kingdom, and Celia asks him if doing this is the right thing to do. Rio remarks that if it were, she wouldn't have that sad look on her face. She asks him what he plans to do if she wants the wedding to stop, and he replies that he'll take her far, far away. Celia smiles, and she asks him to do just that. Rio announces that he will abduct Celia right in front of Charles, as though this were just one big magic trick. Rio leaps across the security detail, easily evading every attack thrown at him. Charles is hysterical and he demands that the kidnapper be captured at once. Rias senses Rio using spirit arts and realizes that he was the same boy who defeated the Minotaur that one time. He decides to test him a little by firing a bolt of energy towards him, and Rio easily defends against it. Rias is colored impressed. Rio flees, and an aerial unit is sent after him. Charles blames this disaster on Alfred, because nothing is ever his fault. Rio carries Celia to safety, but the Griffin unit is hot on their tail. Rio speeds up and he lands in a dead-end alley where Aisha is waiting. He hands her off and promises to meet with her soon. Rio draws the Griffin unit's attention, prompting them to call for reinforcements. This is all going according to plan. Rio kicks up a huge commotion, and he enters the streets for some close quarters fighting. He defeats several royal guards but struggles to fight without killing anyone. Suddenly Alfred, the king's sword himself, steps forward to challenge him. Alfred draws his sword, and for the first time today Rio feels as though he is in trouble. Alfred's reputation precedes him. He truly is the strongest in the kingdom. They appear evenly matched, and Alfred appears shocked that someone could possibly match him like this. However, he notices that his opponent isn't using the edges of his blades. Feeling that he is being underestimated, Alfred decides to end this with a single strike. He uses his noble phantasm, Clarent Blood Arthur, and unleashes a devastating laser from his sword. However, when the smoke clears, Rio is nowhere to be found. To ensure that he was truly defeated and did not escape, he orders a sweep of the surrounding area. While the Beltram nobility is in shambles, Celia anxiously awaits Rio's arrival. Rio finally arrives, though his clothes are in tatters. Celia trips while rushing over to embrace him, and they are optimistic about their future together. Suddenly, Aisha experiences a terrible premonition. Beams of light suddenly shoot up from the ground, and she tells Rio to please save them. In a grassy field, 3 Japanese students struggle to figure out where they've gone, but a bandit kidnaps them and shoves them into slave carts. Rio flies in, and after hearing Japanese voices coming from one of the carriages, he defeats the bandits and rescues them. They too are surprised to hear him speaking Japanese. One of them, revealed to be Masato, tells Rio that they have one more companion who was captured. Rio heads over to the last remaining cart, and his eyes don't deceive him. It's the love of his life, Miharu. And that brings the anime to an end. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on another video. Until next time, take care.